let's get rolling. Welcome to another Buried in Treasure Learning Community for 2023. This is Chapter 10, Sorting and Removing Stuff. Let's go with the action phase we're in. So we are really going to be focused on aspects of really getting into the action of addressing our hoarding in an environment to really reflect progress towards our goal. So this is chapter 10, and we're going to be sorting and removing stuff, right? So let's get right into it. Welcome. Today's meeting is hosted by DBHR through the Washington State Healthcare Authority. Be reminded that this is an interactive meeting and we encourage you to ask questions and participate throughout the session. The slides and recording will be sent to you by email after the presentation. So just let us know if that is occurring as it should. So we want to move right into it. We've gone through a series, certainly a series of sessions, and we've really progressed from really having a clear understanding as to the definition of hoarding to really getting into the stage or the action stage of really taking more of a definitive approach to addressing the concrete, tangible element of our challenge, which is certainly the possessions that have become so much a challenge to our functioning and living in the environment in the way it's intended and the way we desire. So it's really about how are we moving those tangible possessions to its appropriate place. It really allows us to live in a manner in which we choose, in a manner in which we desire to really meet our goals of functioning optimally in our living environment. So let's do our general housekeeping. We want to make sure that you are actively participating. You use the chat for sharing. And certainly if the option presents, we want to make sure that you take the benefit of, you can speak directly. We'll unmute and just speak directly. Information regarding your call-in is there. If you're having trouble with your video options, just ensure that we have that information. Subtitles also activated. You can certainly use that captions if you need it. And thank you, Crystal. Crystal put in the call-in information and with the meeting ID and password in the chat for those who may need it. So we want to certainly take an opportunity, a few minutes to review chapter 9 in our previous meetings focus from September. Really sorting and removing stuff, getting ready, really that preparation, pre-action phase that we really addressed. We looked at some particular assessment tools and some approaches to intervene in that behalf. What I'm going to ask you to certainly do is I'm going to utilize a poll question. Some questions for you to provide some feedback as to how you, whether you had an opportunity to use some of the tools recommended, and what your understanding and interpretation of last session's highlights and main elements were. So if you can certainly take an opportunity, take a few minutes quickly to answer some questions, and we'll get a sense as to what is your general understanding of the subject matter we addressed, and where do we pick up and move forward in our progressive approach here to addressing hoarding. So just take a few minutes. Let me know if everyone has the ability to access. Okay, I see folks are providing feedback on the poll, and then we will take a look at the feedback and review. I'll give another minute or so for folks to provide some feedback, and we'll take a look at it. Bravo. So we'll give another 30 seconds, and then I will end the poll and provide you with the results, and we can collectively look at it, see what's. All right. So I'm going to now end the poll and share the results. So essentially the first question was, challenges to making a change include motivation and commitment to change, readiness to change, developing a change plan, and identifying and dealing with anticipated barriers. Is that true, false, or were you uncertain? To no surprise, the majority of you, the overwhelming majority, almost 97% of you said true, that statement is true. Few folks were uncertain, but I can understand that certainly if you did not attend last session or you weren't fully clear on that aspect. Yes, the answer is certainly true. Those elements really speak to some of the challenges to making a change, particularly motivation and readiness to change, and having that plan that allows you to both move clearly and definitively towards your goals, and also be able to prepare for barriers, anticipated barriers. Secondly, according to chronobiology, what is the best time of the day to make decisions? And I'm hoping that that one was a little more challenging. So your options was any time of the day, 1 to 3 hours after waking up when your cognitive powers are there, or 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. when your brain is in acquisition mode. So more than half of you, about 69% said 1 to 3 hours after waking up when your cognitive powers are at its highest rate, right? So it's best. It was a little tricky, but the answer there is just 1 to 3 hours after waking up when your cognitive powers are its best. Because when we talk about making decisions, we want to make sure that we are cognitively not just aroused, but our best state of making those decisions. Whereas when your brain is in acquisition mode, it is best to then learn new things. So it's a big difference between when it's best for us to learn new things as opposed to when it's best for us to make decisions. So that's the distinction. And I think most of you kind of got it, but that's important in that sense. Lastly, did you try or share the assessment tools that we offered, my categories and location form, my preparation for organizing form, and my reward form? A number of you said not yet. Well, most of you said not yet. I'm hoping that you have the opportunity to try it in near future, because as we know, if we don't put it into practice, it is very difficult for us to really own it and add it to our toolkit. So I encourage you certainly to, as soon as the opportunity presents, to really plan on really sharing that or utilizing those elements with the folks that you're providing support for, or for yourself in this case, if you are dealing with hoarding challenges as well. So glad to know that folks are planning on utilizing those tools. So what's our takeaway that we hope to gain from today's session? What are the learning objectives? We want to recognize the need to give sorting and removing the highest priority to be successful. We'll talk some more about what that really means. In essence, if it's not your primary focus, if you're not dedicating the adequate time to it, the outcomes are going to reflect the kind of dedication you put into it. So it's important to ensure that you make it top priority in order for you to really get the best out of your efforts. Outline effective decision-making strategies to determine what to keep and what to get rid of. As we know, there's a tremendous amount of both emotional, psychological challenges for us to make those decisions and to, move on from stuff and really address those emotions, those attachments that we have to possessions that are impeding our ability to appropriately place them, appropriately store them, or to get rid of them so that we were able to maximize our environment and find our best functioning in our living circumstances. Thirdly, to explain the benefits of using the hypothesis testing to examine your attachment to possessions. As we know, you really have to reconcile attachment to your possessions in order to make those clear and definitive decisions about what to keep, what not to keep, and what you should get rid of in a sense. Finally, we want to explain the value of experimenting with letting go, really making that concrete, tested decision of letting go of an item without feeling that you've lost your connection with the person that is associated with the item, or the state of emotional wellness that you think may be lost in relinquishing that possession. So, as ambitious as that is, we are going to try our best to get as close to proximity to those outcomes. But the objective is to really ensure that you have a clear understanding as to what are the tested, what are the standardized ways of really addressing those concerns. As we know, when we're in action stage, it's really about addressing things concretely in a way that is designed, is way that is established, and really assessing our progress along the way, really establishing a way of gauging and benchmarking our progress or challenges that may occur in this process. So, action stage of change. We know oftentimes that's the best place when we're working with the people we serve, consumers, right? When they are in the action stage and they're ready to go, they're motivated, they understand the value of change, they see in their own mind's eye and vision a way of achieving those outcomes in a clear path. We have a plan, things are in place, and we're working that plan. The best stage that we mostly want to be in with the people we serve. Basically, we're hoping that people will learn and act towards determining what to keep and what to get rid of, right? And develop a tolerance for distressing or feelings of anxiety, uncertainty, guilt, regret, all those negative emotions that come with relinquishing stuff. And they will stick to their schedule and practice making those tough decisions to achieve the goal. We really want to get into that element. We want to have kind of a supported and realistic view of change through some definitive small steps. We want to make sure that we have our coping mechanism in place, tested. We feel confident about them when we encounter barriers or challenges to making progress. We want to make sure we have those reinforcers in place and we have adequate support to scaffold us along the way. So when we're in that action stage, we want to make sure that those things are in place. We've tested out some of the elements that we know are going to be encumbrance, and we have the support necessary as we stumble. So most of us, like we said, it makes it a lot easier to facilitate and support change when someone is in the action stage of change. So when we talk about taking action, particularly with really sorting and removing stuff, we want to ensure that we've developed that practice muscle we talked about, right? That way of ensuring that we're putting enough time, energy, and effort into the act of actually sorting and getting rid of items. We've gone up in terms of our practice to more than 30 to 60 minutes of it daily. So we're engaging in that practice of sorting and determining where things need to go consistently enough that it is drilled in, it's now a common practice, and it's something that we're doing purposefully and as a priority. The characteristic of this stage is really doing it, really taking into account and seeing evidence of our action. We want to be practicing those new behaviors. That is, when it's getting stuff and putting it in the recycle bin, putting it in a specific parcel, storing it where it needs to be stored, we're making conscious effort to take action that allows us to see the dividends, see the outcomes that we're really looking at. Concretely, small steps. And we want to avoid old behaviors. So as we sort and put things in the appropriate category, the appropriate place, we're also at that point conscious that we can't be acquiring things ongoingly while we're ridding ourselves of unwanted or encumbrance. So it's important to ensure that we have that kind of balance. We're sorting and removing while we are minimizing acquisition. And that's very critical and important. And we're also making conscientious effort to really figure out and practice those coping mechanisms to help us tolerate those unpleasant emotions while we persevere towards kind of sorting and ridding ourselves of items that we find to be encumbering. We want to avoid the temptation to save possessions or putting things away, right? We want to make sure that we are not stuck in that mode of I'm not certain as to what to do with this. I'm going to hold on to it. You don't want to, what we call repiling, right? Putting things back or being stagnant in terms of not making decisions. We are now in decision mode. When we pick something up, we make that determination, we put it where it needs to go, and we move on. We want to ensure that as we engage in that, the people that are supporting us or the folks that we are supporting, we're providing support and praise and recognition for their efforts. We want to focus on the rewards that we put in place after each session. And we've talked about what those rewards look like, whether or not after a session of sorting and getting rid of stuff, you know, we go for a walk, we listen to some music, we watch TV, we have that healthy snack that's associated with success. We want to make sure that we're doing that. We want to be problem solving as we go along. And experimenting with letting go, really talking ourselves through that process of analyzing the value and importance of this stuff and making the determination as to where it should go. So this is all involved in that action stage. This is what we should be actively doing. And as we know, like anything else, it's not foolproof. There's going to be tremendous stumbling blocks in the way. We're going to have our challenges. We're sometimes going to question our ability, our readiness, our commitment, our ability to get things done. So we want to look at those challenges concretely, conscientiously, right? And part of doing that is to ensure that we are committing to the duration and frequency of sessions. We're talking about 30 to 60 minutes daily. We know that our exercise muscle must be at that rate in order for us to have tangible success. We want to make sure that we have a way of really finding and sustaining those internal motivation and distress tolerance, right? We want to make sure that your willpower is there. And we have ways of kind of reinforcing that and tuning into that. We want to make sure that we're not slipping up by you know, giving in to those personal external pressures, right? We want to ignore the noise and not heeding to temptation. So when we hear that or we see that announcement for the next garage sale, or we get that urge to think of, maybe I should just go to the mall. Maybe I'll not go to the mall and not buy anything, but I just go to the mall. We understand that that temptation may be too great for us. So we find alternative activities that are beneficial, that are meaningful, that are enjoyable, that does not include acquisition or acquiring of stuff. We want to make sure that we're also, if necessary, tuning out or reminding folks who may also be people who, whether consciously or unconsciously, encouraging us to do those things that lead to acquisition. We want to make sure that we are really signaling to them very clearly, listen, please don't call me to give me any reminders or heads up about yard sales, community sales, or ask me for going to the mall, because that's not what I'm planning to do for this week. I have clearly established time for sorting, and I want to focus on that. If you care about me and you want to support me, don't make that call Friday night reminding me about Saturday morning's yard sale, because there's two outcomes of that call. You're either not, when I see your number, I'm not going to respond, or when you call, I say, if it's anything to do with a sailor staff, the conversation ends here. So you've got to be very concrete about it. Want to make sure that you're using those short-term rewards, right? Start with an area that impacts your day-to-day life and stick to it until that area is clear. So you want to make sure that you have that clear, definitive way of getting short-term gains, those early victories. And we'll talk some more about what that would look like, because there's specific areas that you make sure you focus on and you achieve the goals intended before you move on to the next thing. So you're not trying to sort in 15 different areas of your house. It's just not a practical way of doing it. The outcomes are oftentimes not the desired. I want to be open to receiving help and actively seeking support, which is oftentimes, as we know, the most difficult thing for people who hoard, because part of the hoarding reality is that people tend to, by either their own actions or by default, isolate and set up significant boundaries between them and people who may be supporting. So we want to make sure that we're laying out that red carpet and inviting people who have demonstrated the ability to support us in a meaningful, practical way. And not letting your pride get in the way. It's okay for us to, have that person that says, oh, you're doing well, but you want to remind them, okay, we're focusing on the kitchen. So don't come talk about the living room and the garage. We're just focusing on the kitchen. That's where we are. So give me some feedback or some support as it relates to my efforts in the kitchen. And that oftentimes may be a difficult task to do, but people get, like, if people intend to support you meaningfully, they will kind of take lead as to how you demonstrate where you need that support and how they receive that support. So it's important to really recognize those particular challenges. So what do we do when we're supporting someone in the action stage? What's the critical element? We want to make sure we're using strategies in the change plan. And why is that important? Anyone care to share why we want to make sure that we're using the strategies in the change plan as we take efforts towards sorting, get into that action mode? Why is that so important for us to stick to the change plan? And as tempted as I am to jump in and give an answer, I'm reminded by Crystal early, you have to give people some time. Take your time, pause. So I'm going to be disciplined today. Yeah, I have, Crystal remind me I have to learn to sit comfortably in my silence. It's okay. Michelle says to ensure forward progress and good habits going forward. Yes, that's a major part of it. Really to ensure that we are, you know, we have a way of measuring whether we're making progress or not. And we can only do that if there are some clear benchmark, there's some clear definitive stages that we should be at. And that's our best way of gauging that. And the only way we can do that is to refer to the service plan or the change plan. Corey says, I'm trying to remember the change specifically, but I would imagine it's what you'd have to plan to work on. Yeah, essentially, the reason why it's important for us to use the strategies in the change plan, because that's what we measure our progress or lack thereof, using that as a point of reference, but also it's ensure that we are providing, if we're supporting that person with intentional services, right? They're clearly defined ways of doing what we do so that we have a way of gauging our progress. And Mano says it improves productivity and reduces the stress of decision making. Yes, it gives us something to really assess and helps us have a point of reference so that we're not all over the place or we're not responding to our most prominent emotion in that moment. We're dealing with a concrete, tangible way of operating. And Denisha says, creating a plan, setting a goal, offers support and provides a program for change. Absolutely. Because you can't change what you're not aware of. You have to change what you know, what you've committed to. Have a sense of what your commitment is, what the plan is. We have to also make sure that we're sustaining a commitment to change and establishing a new pattern of behavior. And managing those barriers to change, whether it's external and internal, right? Those feelings as well as those triggers on our external self. And evaluating whether or not the change plan is working or whether it's appropriate for where we are in terms of our capacity, our readiness, our confidence. That's where we have to gauge. And the CS says, as we go along in the process, we can change what isn't working and focus on ways that the system is working. Absolutely. And then we'll be in a better frame of mind when creating new strategic plan. Absolutely. So we have to have a sense as to what we put in place and that time and effort into planning, whether it's working or not, and what is not working, and what needs to be modified as we go along. And we need to continuously help that person not only elicit natural supports, but utilize them. Because I don't know about you, but if you have that list of people that you should call, or you can call to support, but you're not doing that, it's just a list of names, right? It's like decorations. If you don't use them, they're not going to fulfill the purpose or the intended purpose. And Sabat says change plan can always be a work in progress for the goal. Yes, it's a fluid document. It's something that we continuously change as we progress or as we move along in the process. So that's important and critical. So that's why we're spending a lot of time on really understanding what the stage of change, the action stage is. So I want to ask, which one of these processes has been the most successful for you? Where in the strategy of that whole element do you find the most success as you look through the step-by-step process? Okay, Kristen says managing internal and external barriers to change. And I'm assuming that's kind of that shared response, that feedback evaluation kind of process where you're really talking about, hey, what is happening? What's the area that you're finding the most comfort with, you have the most confidence, and that you're demonstrating increased effort, right? And Darla says sustaining commitment to change and establishing a new pattern of behavior. I can imagine that, because sometimes, as we know, particularly in change, it ebbs and flows. So sometimes really sustaining that commitment is very challenging, particularly for folks who are facing it an arduous task. Hoarding is a very challenging change process. So sometimes change can be so incremental that it's easy to assume that you're not moving. And you have to give people that feedback that, hey, you're making some progress. You may not, the house may not be clear, in one shot, but you're moving progressively to where you need to be. Very good. So just continue to evaluate where do you find the most challenges and where people are doing the best work, so you have a sense as to where you need to focus your energies and supports and guidance. What areas is most significant? So we talk about the importance of matching your interventions to the stage of change. And for those who are uncertain about the stage of change, we are going to be focusing on so much of that during our FCS training coming up and our Golden Thread training. But we're talking about the stages of change from pre-contemplation to, in many cases, if you're substance use specific in your service, you talk about maintenance and relapse. But in general, we're talking about that from pre-contemplation to maintenance. So it's important, if people are in this the action stage of change, they are recommended and dedicated interventions that have given the best outcomes, that are proven to get the best dividends for their effort. So when we talk about people making a change and living those new behaviors, what we find is that the interventions that are really focused on skill building and helping people process those emotional connection to their actions are the best efforts. So we're talking about skill building, really helping people with learning new skills, or focusing on practicing those skills and getting the best out of those new skills, or sharpening old skills, and really helping people process their emotion, how they think, how they feel, and how it's impacting their actions. So we're talking, for those who are familiar, we're talking about really practicing those catch it, check it, change it elements, right? When you have a negative emotion that may be impeding your dedicated action, are you really taking the time to catch that thought or feeling? You want to check it, look for evidence to either determine whether or not what you're feeling and thinking is accurate, and then really look at whether or not you want to change that thought to get the kind of outcomes you desire. So it's important to look at it from that perspective, but we focus primarily on the skill building and cognitive behavior strategies. So where do we start? It's critical and important in the action stage of change, when we're beginning to really sort and dedicate ourselves to really removing items or possessions that will enable us to maximize our living space and live as optimally. We want to start in a place that has the most significant impact on your day-to-day life. An example of that would be the kitchen, right? Where people spend a lot of time or effort. For some folks, it may be the hallway, it may be the living room. So you really have to assess, with that person, what's the most impactful space in their day-to-day life that they desire to see significant change in terms of their ability to maximize that space. So we really want to start with someplace that will have an impact on that person's day-to-day life. And I said, if all else failed, begin with the first place that catches your eyes or wherever you are in the moment. Sometimes you just have to make that decision, because you can't spend too much time procrastinating or stagnating with that decision. It may be, a person may clearly indicate to you, I'm not certain where to start. And if that person is living in a supported living circumstance, or a circumstance that is shared, it may be the case where's the first place the inspector or the landlord is going to look if they come into your home? Maybe the living room. Where's the place that, maybe impacting your entry and egress. That may be the place to start. But in most cases, people are likely to tell you where they may want to dedicate their efforts based on what they utilize the most. So that's an important decision to make, even before you really get into the sorting element. Really determine where you're going to start. And you make sorting and removing your highest priority. You want to pick a place, pick a time, stick to a daily schedule, don't put it off. And resist the temptation to rationalize your way out of not engaging in it. So when we talk about picking a place, like we said, we want to determine which place has the most significant impact in your day-to-day life. You want to stick to a schedule regardless of how you feel or what is happening on that day. You want to make sure if you are utilizing, and we just talked about it in terms of chronobiology, if you are really going to utilize an hour window, you want to do it at the time when you are able to make the best decisions. So we know it's 1 to 3 hours after you wake up. Now, as I know, most folks will tell me, well, Earl, it's based on when that person wakes up. What if they wake up in the midday? What if they wake up at 2 o'clock? It's not for you to determine. You really work with that person's schedule, and you certainly can provide some recommendation and guidance, but you don't want to get into a battle of wills over what's the best time. Just, hey, what we've learned is that 1 to 3 hours after you wake up is the best time to really make decisions. Because when you're talking about discarding and categorizing, you really want to make sure that the person is in the decision-making mode. Hence why we focus on the chronobiology of time. What's the best time to make decisions? So does that make sense in terms of really having a clear step-by-step plan as to how to really operationalize making the prioritizing sorting? I'm hoping that that gives us a clear path and a guideline as to how we make that a priority. Because this is a good basic guideline that the person can use. The person can take this and actually narrate it and put it on the refrigerator or someplace that is notable. I need to pick a place, pick a time, stick to a daily schedule, don't put it off, resist temptation. Very brief, very concrete. You can really have a definitive way of doing it. So, or you can use this as kind of a jumping off point. When you come for that session with that person, you'll be like, hey, what's today's place? What's the time that, when you already arrive at that time, how do we stick to this schedule each day? What are you going to do tomorrow? How are you going to plan this? So when you're actually ending your session, you can actually revisit what the next day is going to look like for that person. So you give them a place that they can continuously engage in an action. So we want to make sure it's a uniform approach to each session, right? You want to make sure you determine, that person determines what to keep or let go. What category does it belong to? And what is its final location or destination, I would say. So first, you make sure there's a clear space to do your sorting and removing to ensure that you have a list of categories and location. And we've talked about that last week in terms of really categorizing things, right? We talk about narrowing down those categories so they don't become arduous. So we're not having 15 categories of paper. We're talking about, in essence, good guidance is 1 or 2 categories for paper. You can literally say, we call them bills or wills, right? So bills are the active things that you're using that you have to pay or you have to address in that moment. And wills are the things that you want to make sure you keep for archive for history. You want to make sure your birth certificate, those kinds of important documents are categorized into one category. The other things are just bills or things that needs to be addressed. Does that make sense? Because historically, what we know is that people spend so much time trying to categorize perfect categories and categories to fit everything, or for everything to fit the category, that the entire session could be spent on categorizing and nothing gets put into those categories. They just get basically named. And it feels like an achievement because if you have, think of it, if you spend an hour coming up with 15 categories and writing them down, it's kind of an achievement. It's just not an activation. You're just not in action. You're still in that preparation stage. And we're in action stage. So it's important for us to really get into that element. Now, each session should follow a specific procedure. And this is where I want you to kind of hone in clearly. We want to pick up that item and make the decision about keeping it or removing it. Categorize it, determine its destination, and move it to its dedicated or designated location. What would that look like? Let's look at a classic example, right? For me, it would be shoes. Somebody said, Earl, we heard enough about your shoes. You don't want to go through that to get to that. But think of an item that in your recent support or your recent help with a person that you had to really help that person determine what they're going to do with it. Give me an example. Come on, I know you've got examples. What's the most commonly hoarded item? Clothes, food, books. Absolutely. Wow. So clothes seem to have won. So let's look at clothing, right? A piece of clothing. That shaggy coat that you haven't worn since the 1970s. That probably didn't even fit you when you were 20 years old, but you're holding on to because it was when you had your first job and you got your first salary and you felt like, you were on top of the world, so you bought it. So a shaggy coat that you haven't worn in about, 10 years, you determine, should I keep it or remove it right after you pick it up? And you're like, okay, this hasn't fit me. It's not in style. And no, I'm not going to keep it for some, presumed grandchild or no. I'm going to still have a few dollars when I'm ready to buy a coat for my grandchild. So you don't have to figure out your grandchild stuff right now. You're determining what you're doing with this in this moment because it's taking up space that you don't have. You determine you want to remove it, right? And you determine you really don't want to put it in the garbage because, yes, someone may be able to use it who has a funky style that they're still utilizing, right? So you determine, I'm going to actually donate it. So you put it in the donation category and you put it in that bag for donation that's going to be picked up on Saturday that you've arranged. And you move it into that bag and you take that bag and you put it in the garage because that's where they're going to pick it up from. Does that make sense? See, that's the kind of step-by-step process that we want. You pick it up, you identify what it is, you determine that you want to get rid of it using donation, you put it in the donation bag, you put the bag where it's going to be picked up, and you move on to the next item. That's the kind of uniform approach to things we want to have. And I'm seeing a lot of different options, but we want to make sure that we have a uniform approach to doing things so that we're not going through different iterations of the approach each time and then figuring out whether we're doing the right thing or not. It's about having that consistent pattern that you can actually do it blindfolded to some degree. Without much thought, it becomes automatic. Corey says, yes, I make labels for keep, dispose, donate, and then create bins, piles for each. Absolutely. Whatever your system is that you have marked down, you're following that system consistently without much thought or opportunity to procrastinate. You're really doing it conscientiously. Bottles, cans, Leona says, metals, things that they plan to take to recycling center but never have time to do. And that's the challenge. So we want to make sure that when we identify it, we categorize, we determine whether we get rid of it, we categorize, we want to put it in a place, and we want it to move to its final destination, which in some instances may be on the curb to the pickup. And the label idea is great because it's going to give us a sense as to exactly where that needs to go and what we intend to do with it so that we don't have, because the biggest thing about challenge with sorting is uncertainty leads to keeping. Please understand that clearly. Uncertainty, even in a moment, leads to, when I'm uncertain about whether or not I want to be rid of this stuff, the default is to keep it. So we have to make sure that we're not heeding to that temptation. Hence, we have a consistent system. And we review how did the session go. We want to try that approach. We want to assess how it went. Where were the complications? What were the complications? Did we, go into that process of kind of trying to figure out whether or not we're making the right decision? We want to be able to do, and we want to write down the challenges and success. Because what we know is the consistency, and the more often we do it, it gets easier. The more we have a predictable, consistent way of doing it, makes sorting, categorizing, and disposing a lot easier. And Daisy says, I don't technically label, I do use piles when sorting and staying within the boundaries in each pile. Keep, donate, toss, etc. Yes, whatever your system is, you want to consistently adhere to that system and ensure that you're making very quick and definitive decisions. So we want to look at decision-making time. Because you'll be faced with some critical decisions during the action stage, whether or not to keep the possession, right? The focus is primarily on your ability to make effective decisions in a way that help you meet your goal. Because remember, people who have trouble controlling their possessions often keep things without thinking about them. It's easier to keep for a lot of time or just in case it might be needed. So that's why we're trying our best to eliminate that time of uncertainty, that time of contemplation. We want to make sure it's almost automatic. Pick up, determine, move, destination. And quick steps, easy steps, consistent steps, predictable steps. You want to challenge that powerful urge to hold on to that item, right? You want to pick it up. You look at that item, consciously look at that item and say loudly what you think about it. This pair of shoes is an absolutely lovely reminder of my soccer days. But Lord knows that I haven't played soccer in 20 years. And I haven't even tried this on to determine whether it fits, and I can't wear a soccer shoes to the mall because it had pace. It's not going to be tangible. So you want to talk to that, you want to talk consciously about that item in a concrete way that is really going to spur a decision about whether you're keeping or discarding it. You want to decide whether to keep it or let it go. And if you've made that statement that I have not used it in the past year, therefore, based on my goals and the way I operate, the way I've established a standard for myself, it should now be discarded. Note the themes or questions that aid your decision-making. What are some of the questions that help you make a decision? And we want to look at those questions. Some of those questions that should help your decision-making are really concrete questions. How many do I already have, and is that enough? We always speak about the 10 different scissors, right? Or opener, or our wine bottle opener, or all those items that we just hold on to stuff, or coffee cups, right? This is my 35th coffee cup. I can't even remember I had this. I haven't used this coffee cup in a year. Therefore, it really does not lend itself to any beneficial effect in terms of discarding it or holding on to it. I just, that's what it is. I haven't used it in a year. Do I have a specific plan to use it within a reasonable time frame? If the answer is no, where should it go? To the discard pile. How does it compare with the things I value highly? And you can ask yourself some concrete questions in terms of, is it more important for me to hold on to this stuff that then creates a pile that prevents me from using my kitchen? Or is it more important for me to use my kitchen in the intended way? The answer may be very clear. Having 15 skillets, but no place to use that skillet because you can't cook on the stove surface because it's piled up, prevents me from actually utilizing my kitchen in the intended way. Prevents me from having the benefit of a well-cooked meal. Prevent me from feeling purposeful and valued based on my ability to cook for myself and the people that I value. Very concrete questions. Is it useful in my everyday life? How does it fit in with my goals of decluttering? Does holding on to this 15th skillet help me achieve my goal of decluttering my larder, decluttering my cupboard, decluttering my kitchen? If the answer is no, it goes to the pile of discarding. So ask yourself, based on your experience, what one of these questions work best for you to motivate someone to make that decision to discard or to keep? I know in my experience, what has really worked very well, both for supporting people and for my own self in terms of determining whether or not I should be holding on to a possession, is if I have a specific plan to use it within a reasonable time frame. This works for me. Because I have to, really take an internal look and make a decision. I can't fake a decision around that. No, the answer is no. Don't intend to use it within a time frame. And I establish what a reasonable time frame is. And we talk about either a year or 6 months, whatever works best for you. Really help you make that determination. So this is an instrumental and a critical one that you can use as a good guide to helping people make decisions. Really have a list of those questions. See what questions they hone in on. See what questions make the most sense for them in their way of processing things, and have them use that consistently in every session of sorting. Fantastic, that's it. Yes, holiday decorations are a tough one. Oh, dear. I can tell you, yes. I don't know about you. How many string of lights that you have that, everyone has a meaning and a purpose, and someone gave it to you and it's valued and you can't get rid of it. And you haven't even checked whether the bulbs is working the last 10 years. But you're holding on to it, right? Because I've heard people say, Earl, this particular set of lights, they don't sell anymore. I have to hold on to it because it was just, I bought it in a time when I was, transitioning from one stage of my life to another. It has this significance. I'm sitting there saying, when is the last time you put it up? I don't know. Have you checked the bulbs? Does it even work? No, but I'll get to it. If it hasn't been used in the last year, what is a reasonable time for using it? If you can't establish a reasonable time, you need to move on. Christmas decorations will be probably sold until the end of time. So there's some decision-making models that are served to be useful for people, because when it comes to decision-making, one has to feel connected and one has to feel that a particular style of decision-making or approach to decision-making works best for them in their mind's eye and their circumstance in their particular way. So these are some approaches. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it. The PDF will have those clickable links, but there's a great deal of decision-making models that you can use. Rational decision-making is one of those particular models that's useful for people with hoarding disorder. Really define what the problem is. I can't make a decision as to whether or not I should discard or keep this particular item. Generate all the possible solutions. Should I discard it? Should I keep it? You look at an assessment criteria. We use some of those questions as assessment criteria. Have you used it in the last year? Would you use it in a reasonable time? Is it going to purposefully help you get towards your goals? Those are some of the criteria you can use. And then you choose the best solution and implement that decision quickly, concretely, and definitively. And evaluate the success of the chosen alternative, right? When you've moved it and you can identify that specific space that it occupied previously, and you can see now you have more common space to use, it gives you that sense of achievement. So this is one of the decision-making models we consistently ask people to use or recommend that folks use, but we want to make sure that people have options. As we know, even the best decision-making model can encounter, can lead you to some challenges. Because we have built-in, sometimes conditioned biases that really leave us in a state of not being able to make decisions in a way that we desire. So we want to be alert to those common mental biases anytime you're making decisions. You want to know that they exist and you're vulnerable to them. It can help you make better decisions. So from confirmation bias to halo effect, there's a lot of biases that really impede or support our efforts to make decisions. One of the most common ones is that confirmation bias, right? You're paying attention to evidence that confirms your belief and ignoring anything that doesn't. That concept of, the last time I got rid of something, a day after, I found that I needed it, and then I didn't have it. Therefore, I'm not going to get rid of it at all. I'm not getting rid of stuff because I can't deal with, what happened the last time. Even though you're ignoring all the stuff that doesn't support that. Even though the decision was difficult, it was one of 15 skillets that you got rid of. And you had 14 other skillets. You just didn't have that one particularly. And you came up with a lot of irrational reasons why you should hold on to that one, even though it's no longer non-stick because it's been scrubbed to the finished stuff. It's no longer non-stick, but you have 4 other non-stick ones that you haven't used. But you just feel an attachment to that one. So sometimes you have to really go through that way of determining whether you're just responding to a bias. So these are certainly biases that you could become familiar with, so you determine whether or not you're really responding to them unconsciously or consciously. Rules for letting go of stuff. We need to have some concrete and definitive rules to help keep us on track. Most importantly, we want to avoid churning. I don't know how many of you may be familiar with the term or the concept of churning, but it really speaks to picking up an item and being undecided about it and then putting it back in the pile. How common is that when you're dealing with folks who are challenged by hoarding issues? Absolutely, Daisy. Yes, churning is very common in the hoarding environment, but oftentimes people are not certain what it is. But that's what it is. Really, churning is really going, it's that concept of almost like, I'm thinking of what analogy I can use that gives you a good picture. it's I don't know if your car is in neutral and you keep pressing the accelerator pedal. That's what it's like. It's like it's like this effort that doesn't really have any outcomes, but it's really not making a decision. It's making a decision to not make a decision, but just keeping yourself busy in that sense. So it's important to understand that you have to avoid that element, right? Because that's why we have that clear plan of when you pick something up, you have to process it and make a decision as to where it's going to go. Not making a decision is not an option in that sense. Because you can always revisit whether you should keep something after you've decided to keep it. But if you keep churning, you don't make a decision. So we want you to make a decision. And there's no right or wrong decision. It's a decision in that moment that activates a movement. This is so someone start clearing their hoarding space and then get overwhelmed with just putting the items back where they started. Yes. But hence why we ask people to dedicate their efforts to a specific space. So that even if you, in that moment, put it back, you can revisit that without being lost in the pile. And if you don't move it, when you come back the next session, it is right where it is and you're in that definitive space. That's why you don't try to sort and remove things from multiple spaces at the same time. Because we can always say, I'm not certain as to what I should do with this particular pot, but in my next session, I will revisit that by going through that process of picking it up, talking about it, going through those questions as to help me make that decision and making a decision about it. Even if you were stymied or limited in this session, you can come back to it. Hope that helps in that sense of clarifying why we focus on a particular area with some definitive space and action. Also important to follow the Ohio rule. Only handle it once. That's important. You pick it up once, you make that decision, and you determine it, because we don't want to have that unnecessary repetition of the same thing being picked up. Because the more you pick it up and you don't make a decision, like I said, the default is to hold on to it. So the Ohio rule speaks to only handle it once. Pick it up, make a decision, move on. And you need to write down a few rules for deciding what to keep and what to get rid of, right? Newspapers, for example, recycle if more than a week old, even if it's unread. You have to have some clear rules. Magazines, recycle if more than 30 days old, even those that are not read. Clothing, donate if not worn for a year or it can't fit. And you know the challenge with folks who have this can't fit me, but. What happens to can't fit me, but? It can't fit me today, but I'm working on losing weight and getting back into shape, so I'm going to hold on to it. What say ye when that comes up? What's the best way to approach that when someone is stuck in that mode? Okay. Christian says, store it away in the garbage, in the garage or storage. What happens when you do that? 1 becomes 10, 10 become 20, and before you know it, you have my pile of I'm not certain I'm going to fit into it, but I probably will. And then my pile of I currently am, it makes me look a little, but I'll hold on to it anyway. You have those piles. So that could even worsen the situation quite often. When someone says, I can't fit into this, but you go back to that question. When do you think within a reasonable time you'll be able to use it? Notice you don't say fit into it. See, that's a distinction. You don't get pulled into the trap of fitting into it. Because fitting, as we know, is very, very personalized, is very subjective, as we all know. We sometimes see this stuff fits perfectly, and a loved one or someone with an objective approach would be like, come on now, Earl. Your big toe is outside of that shoe. What are you talking about fitting? That is not fitting. So the advice, if any, I can give to you is, if you hold on to a piece of clothing merely because you're saying, I want to lose weight and fit into this, you have to revisit those two different goals in a way that is not, what do you call it? You don't congeal them, you don't pull them together. You're like, listen, we are not focused on weight loss stuff, right? What are we doing today? What is our focus today? Our focus today is sorting and discarding. And we're guided by the rules of, if we haven't used it in the last year, it needs to be discarded. What I can certainly suggest to you is, when we're talking about health and well-being and fitting into clothing, we'll address that. But right now, this is about whether or not it fits those rules that we've talked about. And I like that, Crystal. Bodies are meant to change over time. You're not supposed to fit into your clothes. Your clothes are supposed to fit you. Absolutely. And the question is, once again, how does it connect with your goals of decluttering? Because the trick there is that the person is shifting the goalposts. They're talking about goals of fitting into clothes as opposed to discarding, right? They're just shifting it. So sometimes it's conscious or unconscious. Someone may be like, well, I want to hold on to this particular t-shirt because this is when I was a cheerleader and I know I'm going to fit back into it. That's my goal. I'm working with my fitness consultant and all. And you're like, okay, that's your fitness consultant goal and objective you need to work on. We're doing discarding and sorting. So for today, if it doesn't fit, and the rules say if it doesn't fit, you need to get rid of it, that's the decision that we're trying to help you make. And I always say to folks, fashion, style, comfort, where you are in your life, change and evolve as your body and your thoughts change. If you hold on to this piece of clothing that reminds you about the state where you were in, you are not adjusting to the change in your life and embracing where you are and where you're going. Best source of advice. Very good. So we need to examine the bias for your decision, right? What is this likely to be the most stressful and difficult decision? And it can be challenging in that sense. Oftentimes, people's beliefs about their positions are out of sync with how they want to live, but these beliefs are seldom examined or evaluated to determine if they're consistent with a person's goal. And it becomes very stressful. Because one of the things we speak about concretely with folks is, you will have to risk not having something when you need it and getting rid of things that you like. That's part of the discarding process. What we certainly can establish with folks is that no one died, that we can recall, we know from, not having something that they think they need in that moment. That's not resulted in the death of anyone that I know of. And it may seem crude to say that, but it's the reality. If you sit here trying to predict when you will need something, you will be in the predicting business for a long, long time, and you're going to get no action towards your goal. And I always, remind folks, how many of you are still holding on to a floppy disk? Precisely. But if you look back, I can imagine you can recall a million times when you have floppy disks that you say, I want to hold on to because it's going to be critical and important to me because I predict that at some point I'm going to use it. But you can't predict that we would move to a different level of technology that doesn't require that anymore. So we have to be able to adjust and embrace change. And the way we do that is to letting go of the things that are attached to things in the past. And sometimes it means making tough decisions. Because I've seen a lot of folks who are going through every single community garage sale trying to find a working cassette player. Why? Why do you think that happens often? Someone said I still have an 8-track. You're more like, the funny part of it is you're more likely to get more money than it was worth when you got it now. Because there may be someone who's willing to pay you, just for its novelty. You might want to use that to get some money. Some good mixtapes you want to listen to. Oh, yes. The beautiful thing about it is that we can convert it to get those music polished up and nice without having to hold on to a piece of property, right? I still have mixtapes that I thought I would be holding on to that I realized when I looked at them, like, okay, I don't even know if this stuff is even working anymore. I don't have a cassette player. So sometimes you can hold on to something and then go look for something to make sure that that works. And before you know it, you're compiling stuff that you don't need. So I always say to folks, if you're holding on to the cassettes and then going permanently searching for a CD player or cassette player, you're kind of using a backward kind of rationale, because you're probably would be better served looking for a meaningful way of accessing that same music or whatever without having to have a tangible way of holding on to it in terms of something to take up space. Because that's the goal. The goal is to reduce the things that take up space. And you want to use your music. You want to say, Alexa, play Love is in the Air. You don't want to have to go through a pile of cassettes to find the mixtape that has Love is in the Air. Because by the time you find it, you'll be out of the mood. You want to groove in the mood. So think about that. You don't want to lose this. You don't want to lose the mood because you got to go through a pile of stuff. Testing your hypothesis. You want to look at an item and really make a prediction about what's going to happen. And then testing that prediction and taking action to determine its validity. A classic example is, when we have something that we're uncertain as to whether or not we're going to need it in the future. Like, okay, I need to hold on to this stuff because if I lose it, I'm not going to have it when I need it. We want to be able to test that. And the way we do that is through some definitive steps. What item did you identify? Identify an item. You want to know how would you feel to let go of that item? How bad on a scale of 0 to 10 would you be feeling when you let go of it? 10 being just the worst. You just feel like the worst. How long would it take to get over the feeling? What bad outcome could happen if you let go of the item? And how difficult it would be for you to recover if you had the bad outcome on a scale of 0 to 10. So a prediction can be stated as an example of using that kind of hypothesis testing is, if I let go of this coat, I will feel on a scale of 0 to 10, 10-point scale, I will feel 5 or 6 on a level of negative emotions, right? It would take a month for me to get over this feeling. And if I let the item go, the likelihood is that I would need it within the next month and not have it. And if that happens, it would be on a scale of 1 to 10, it would be 9 how difficult it is for me to recover. So you establish that kind of hypothesis by identifying an item and going through that process. Then what you want to do is test that hypothesis. And we'll look at an example in the book that Helen did. She identified a credit card advertisement. And how would it feel to let it go? She said, scary. How bad would that feeling be? She said a 9 in terms of how scary it would be. And how long would it take to get over it? I would never get over it. What bad outcome would happen if I let go of the item? I would need a new credit card and I wouldn't have the right information. How difficult would it be for you to recover that bad thing happened? She says an 8. So you can establish this kind of experimentation with any particular item. And then you want to test it. Test that hypothesis. You try rating the distress of a specific decluttering activity, and then you want to really process for that person to go through that process. And in Helen's case, there were some very concrete responses for her. One of the major elements of this is really recognizing, using that concept of habituation, that over time, anxiety and distress wanes. It eases. It doesn't stay the same level of anxiety. When we talk about habituation, a good example here is the scarecrow concept, right? Here, crows are present in the field. We introduce a scarecrow and prolonged exposure to it results in what? And have you seen this happen quite often? It's no longer scary to the crows. It's been there. They get habituated to it. Same thing happens with distress and negative emotions, anxiety. It diminishes after frequent or repeated exposure to that stimulus. So to change the way you feel about your possessions, you have to have some effort or desire to put up with the distress for a period. And then you start to feel better. The way we do that is we ask people to start by getting rid of the easiest item first and build up your tolerance and make it easier when you get to the harder items. So if it's something that you know you're likely to be a little comfortable or just a little distressed with getting rid of it, you start there first. So once your tolerance builds up, it's a little easier to take on more difficult items or more difficult decisions. Same process with decision making. You want to make sure that you're testing it out repeatedly. You want to make sure that people are taking that step. You really identify an item, have a prediction about it, what you're going to feel, how strong you believe this will happen. You want to deal with that initial discomfort. You want to test what happens in a session, at the end of the session, how challenging it was, what happened, what's the final discomfort level, and then check and see whether your predictions are true after a certain period of time. We ask people to come back to that stuff in a week and say, hey, how are you feeling now as opposed to what you were feeling in the moment you discarded that stuff? And what conclusions did you draw from even testing this out? For a lot of folks, they may be like, well, I realize that I can't deal with that level of distress. You revisit the importance of that value of that item again. So you may want to go back and start from a different point. For some people, it'll be like, listen, I realized that after a week, I was good. Okay, so we can kind of move on. We can move to more challenging items or similar items. So does that make sense? I want to make sure that it gives us kind of a concrete path to which we are looking specifically at the how, the what, and the when we do it, and really testing out the outcomes of our efforts. So we want to make sure in the action stage, we are really building those skills, decision-making skills, so we are able to determine whether something should go into the discard pile or the keeping pile, we want to make sure we're making decisions about sorting in a comfortable, tangible, predictable way that we can gauge and measure using certain questions and approaches. We want to then have a way of testing out those hypotheses that really leave us in an undecided state. We want to test it out. Okay, if you feel that determining where this stuff is going to go is going to make you really anxious, let's do it. Determine what level of tolerance you have for the distress, and then gauge it after the session as to whether or not you were successful in moving past it for a certain period of time. So we're able to pick up from that point. Very critical and important that we do that consistently. Because in the action stage, we want to enact, we want to develop confidence, we want to develop tolerance, distress tolerance. We want to be able to feel that we're moving directionally towards our goal, and we're using a guided way of assessing our progress, assessing our challenges, dealing with those anticipated barriers, and moving along the process of discarding stuff. And as we spoke about clearly, we want to make sure we are focused on the things that are in the service plan or the change plan, and we don't get distracted by other things, right? We're going to call it today. We're not going to get distracted by the whether it can fit question, because that's not what we're focused on. We focus on determining whether or not this should be kept or discarded. We don't change the goal along the way. So I'm going to ask Crystal to put in the chat evaluation tool. We want to remind you, for those who have previously done this particular evaluation, you don't need to do it today. This is an evaluation that we're using for all our learning communities across Washington State. We want to get a sense as to how you are benefiting from, or how are you dealing with our learning communities in particular, and so that we have a sense as to how we need to modify or shape up or determine whether or not this is the best approach for utilizing these learning communities. But we want to see and determine, are you getting what you expect and desired out of these learning communities? So please take a minute or two to complete the evaluation so that we can have some tangible feedback. And while you're doing so, I want to talk about our learning application for our next meeting and a date for our next meeting. So our next meeting is same time, same place next month, on the 28th at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. We will be focused on chapter 11, which is test, and we want to use some particular tools that we've talked about. We want to use the testing out exercise for letting go. So we want to have that practice element in that element of really testing out our discarding and categorizing mode. And we want to look at your hierarchy form, in my hierarchy form, in terms of determining what's a priority for a particular item in terms of making that decision. So next month, we're going to be focused on chapter 11, the bad guys. Welcome to the bad guys, right? Motivation and working time. What kind of challenges our motivation and our commitment? So we'll talk about that next month. I want to thank you for your time and effort today and your engagement. We appreciate your time and attention and participation. Today's webinar was hosted by DBHR through the Washington Healthcare Authority. We'd like to remind you once again that the slides and the recording will be sent to you, and added a number of resources. Don't forget to check out Foundational Community Supports newsletter for all things FCS and upcoming training events. I will be available to you for the next few minutes if you have any questions, but I'm hoping that we were able to not only achieve our outcomes and objectives for today, but this session hopefully provided you with some meaningful tools and understanding of the strategies used to really engage and support people through the process of hoarding and discarding their hoarded items. And thank you. So I'm gonna end the recording, but I'd also, like I said, be available for another 2 minutes if people have questions.